Hello, profilers! It's time for our weekly rendezvous.
The podcast that shares with you true cases of French crime.
So, today, what is the story?
A girl missing in the northwest region of France. All of the events leading up to her disappearance paint a very strange picture of her young teenage life. Welcome to episode 3, Lost Girl.
Enjoy the story!
Wednesday, January 19th, 2011. Our story begins in Pornic, a town in the French department of Loire-Atlantique, where Laetitia Perrais, an 18-year-old high school student, gets ready for school. At 7 a.m., as usual, she leaves her house to head to school. At around 50 meters from her home, Jessica sees something strange on the road. She decides to take a closer look and sees a red scooter knocked over near a ditch. She immediately recognizes the scooter as it belongs to her and also to her twin sister, Laetitia. Panicked, she turns around and runs directly back to her house to ask her sister for an explanation. But when Jessica goes into her sister's bedroom to wake her up, she is nowhere to be found. The young girl, shocked by the absence of her sister, tells her foster parents, who then decide to call the police immediately. The police arrive a few minutes later and find the scooter overturned on the side of the road. They note a few scratches, but nothing serious. At first glance, the police think that the scooter has perhaps been in an accident with another car and could have had a collision with another vehicle, and perhaps this is why it slid a few meters. After a closer look, they confirm this theory and think Laetitia may have been transported to a hospital. But it's not as straightforward as that. They still have questions about the state of the two wheels. It should have been much more damaged for this kind of small scooter after a collision. They notice, for example, that the lights and the mirrors are not broken, even though they are very fragile on this type of transport. The keys are still in the ignition. They also find shoes and papers in the surrounding area.
What's surprising to the police is that if the emergency services had intervened, they wouldn't have left all this stuff in the middle of the road. The police were also struck by the absence of blood, which is quite rare in an accident involving motorcycles. They called all the local hospitals, but there was no sign of the girl.
The police then speculate that it might have been staged. They could be facing a runaway situation. But there are some inconsistencies surrounding this hypothesis. According to several witnesses, Laetitia was a young girl, full of life, with a bright future ahead of her. She had a job and a boyfriend. The police decide to rule out this possibility. The final hypothesis, and the one that everyone fears, is the criminal theory, and that this is in fact a kidnapping. Let's try to understand the tumultuous past of the two girls. They are the children of Sylvie Larcher and Frank Perret. But the couple was a very fragile one, notably because of Frank's problems with alcohol and violence against his partner. In 1993, when the twins were barely a year old, the couple separated, but never really severed ties, as Sylvie couldn't let go of her ex, the girl's father, and was still in love, in spite of his violent tendencies and excessive angry outbursts. His anger was even directed at his own daughters. But in 1995, Frank had crossed a line. He raped his ex-wife, threatening her with a cutter. He attempted to start again later, but this time, Sylvie resisted, and she managed to lock herself in the bathroom to call the police. The man was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years of prison, 2 under probation. He would be incarcerated 2 years later in 1997. As for Sylvie, she was deeply affected by this whole incident. Already emotionally fragile, she gradually sank into a depression and was no longer able to care for her 2 girls. The little girls were then placed into a foster home for minors.
A few months later, they would be placed in a foster family with Gilles and Michel Patron. The foster parents were very close to the young girls, providing the loving home like the 2 girls had always dreamed of having. A few years later, everything was going better for the girls. They even reconnected with their biological father, Frank Perrais, who had since gotten out of prison and who they have kept in touch with.
When the police announced that she had been abducted, it's not only a shock for her foster family, but also for the biological family. Frank Perrais wasted no time. He immediately started searching for his daughter in the places she usually frequented, but with no luck. The investigators raced to find her. They questioned the maximum number of people. Gilles Patron, her foster father, was the first to be questioned. He detailed the night of January 18th to the 19th, the night of Laetitia's kidnapping. He explained to the police that he hadn't slept that night, waiting for Laetitia to come home. At 1:25 a.m., he heard the sound of a car door slam, so he went to the window to try and see what was happening. He decided to go outside, in his yard, to try and catch a glimpse of something, but everything seemed normal to him. It was only the next day that he discovered the scooter when Jessica told him. He explained that the sound of the door slamming that he had heard could correspond to the moment of the kidnapping. When the police call on search dogs, the dogs stay at the scene of the accident, which alerts the police that the young girl was taken in another vehicle. Helicopters and forensic teams were deployed to try and find even the smallest clue. The police would then decide to retrace the young girl's steps over the previous 24 hours. They would try to answer this key question: who had been the last person to see Laetitia? Shortly before 11 a.m., Laetitia got ready to walk the 3 kilometers to her workplace, where she would be working her shift until 3 p.m. But from that very moment, her daily routine would change. Laetitia sent a message to her foster mother, Michel Patron, saying that she would be staying in La Bennerie en Retz, the town where she worked, during her 3-hour break. An interesting lead for the police, as this was an unusual event for the young girl. They started to dig deeper into this lead, and several people would come forward with an interesting testimony. they were adamant that they had seen the girl with a man that they didn't recognize. A man in his 30s, over 5'9" tall, with slicked back hair and a relatively pale complexion. Stephen, a young 18-year-old guy and Laetitia's colleague, reported hearing this man yell at the young girl that he would be the one who came to pick her up that night at the end of her shift. According to witnesses, they assumed that Laetitia and this man were very close, as they hugged several times, a gesture usually reserved for couples in France. For the witnesses closest to her, this would raise suspicions, as at that time, Laetitia had a boyfriend named Kevin. Usually, around 10 p.m., at the end of her shift, the girl would go directly home, following Stephen. But that night in question, she informed Stephen that it wouldn't be the case, and not to worry, because she had other plans and would be going home much later. The young man, not asking any questions, went home alone. However, while he was riding his scooter home, a white Peugeot 106 came speeding towards him, forcing him to stop. The driver rolled down his window, and Stephen recognized him. It was the man Laetitia was seen with in front of the hotel. He was annoyed and seemed very upset. He asked where Laetitia was. Stephen responded that she was still at work, and the man sped off in the direction of the hotel. Witnesses claimed to have seen a man join Laetitia at the end of her shift. One of the clients at the hotel, who had been served by Laetitia that same night, saw her in a bar, the Barbe Bleus, at around 10:45 p.m. But that would be the last witness to have seen Laetitia. So it seems impossible to say what happened after this last sighting. But that doesn't stop investigators from continuing. On the contrary, since William, Laetitia's best friend, would bring additional evidence.
He told the police officer that he had spoken to the girl around 11 p.m., first by text message and then by phone. At around 11 p.m., the young man received a message from Laetitia saying,
"I've got something crazy to tell you."
Around midnight, he answered her call, and the young girl made a disturbing revelation. She told him that she had been raped.
She sounded hesitant on the phone, confused, and above all, very scared. It was as if she was trying not to say too much. William overheard music and tried to find out where she was and what she was doing. But when he asked her questions, she decided to end the conversation and hang up. This would be Laetitia's last call, and unfortunately, there wouldn't be any more. In addition to the other testimonies already obtained by the police, the son of the owners of the hotel where the young girl works also gave a statement. He lives in a studio close to his parents' hotel, and that evening, he was relaxing with his friends playing video games. At around 1 a.m, he heard a sound in the street. The noise was loud enough to prompt him to look out the window. He spotted Laetitia in a heated argument, helmet in hand, leaning into the window of a white Peugeot 106. Laetitia got on her scooter, while the other car sped off again, but in the opposite direction of Laetitia. This man was indeed the last person to see Laetitia alive, but nobody knows this man in his 30s, and they have no idea who he could be. For the moment, the police make do with the description given by witnesses. They quickly organize an interrogation of the people present in the bar on the evening of the young woman's disappearance. A huge discovery moves the investigation forward, as the police obtained the name of the owner of this famous white Peugeot 106, Tony Meillon. In fact, he isn't really the owner. The investigators discovered that the vehicle was stolen, and the man they were looking for was a regular in police stations. Born on August 14th, 1979, he already has a 7-page criminal record, including 13 convictions. These include not only minor offenses, but also felonies. Between May 1996 and March 1998, he was in and out of prison for 3, 4, and 6 months, mainly for theft. In 2001, he was sentenced by the Nantes Criminal Court, named the Assize Court, to 5 years imprisonment for the rape of his cellmate while on remand in 1999. He was released 2 years later due to a reduced sentence. In August 2003, he was arrested during a masked armed robbery of 3 stores where he stole narcotics. In June 2005, he was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. He was released again after only a few years with a reduced sentence. In 2009, he was sentenced to a 1-year imprisonment for the contempt and threatening of a magistrate judge. He was released in February 2010 for good behavior, but this time with a psychological follow-up. Due to the lack of resources, the people in question did not provide this follow-up.
Tony Meillon has just gone from being a mere witness to the prime suspect in the kidnapping of Laetitia Perrais. If he really is involved, investigators believe that they need to act quickly, given the dangerous nature of this individual. A new problem for the police is that the kidnapper has no fixed address. No one knows where to find him. The police are looking for a way to locate him and consider triangulating his position with a cell phone trace.
The only drawback is that it takes a very long time, and for the police, time is of the essence. Laetitia's situation could change at any second. After a thorough investigation, the police come up with a lead. They discovered that among the many places where Tony Meillon could be living, one corresponded perfectly to a hideout, particularly for a kidnapping. Near Arton-en-Retz, Tony's cousin lives with his girlfriend on a large plot of land with a house, a shed, and a caravan. An ideal location for holding someone against their will. Furthermore, this cousin is out of town, giving Meillon total freedom. On Wednesday, January 19th, 2011, at around 11 p.m., the police scouted the area for more information before launching a possible assault. But it was impossible for them to make a move undetected, as the property was equipped with motion lights throughout. They also had watchdogs protecting the property, making it impossible for the police to know whether Laetitia Perrais was in the area. They decided to abandon the search so as not to put Laetitia's life in danger if she was on site. They call in the elite gendarmerie to take charge of the operation, the GIGN, There's no time to lose. Everyone's involved in this operation and joining forces. The town's mayor provides the GIGN with the town's land registry. This way, the operation can be launched as smoothly and as quickly as possible. At 4:30 a.m., the GIGN was in place and ready to enter the property. One goal in mind: apprehending Tony Meillon and finding Laetitia Perrais. But as they headed toward the caravan, one of the GIGN members spots the target. He wasn't in the caravan as they initially thought, but in the main house. Changing strategy, they decide to launch the assault on the house. They place explosives at the front door and set off a large explosion, wounding the suspect in the head, who collapses near the sofa. The suspect is apprehended, and the GIGN doctor ensures that his life is not in danger. He is nevertheless transferred to hospital under GIGN escort. The premises were immediately searched, and the investigators found several illegal items on the premises. The white Peugeot 106 that had been stolen, 700 grams of cannabis resin, a .22 long rifle. But unfortunately, there was still no trace of Laetitia in the house. They decided to search the garden, the caravan, and the shed, but found no trace of the young girl. Nevertheless, the investigators remained convinced that Meillon was involved in the kidnapping of the young woman. The following day, Tony Meillon, whose identity had been confirmed by fingerprinting, was taken into police custody for questioning at around 11:30 a.m. The first challenge for the gendarme was that the suspect was completely silent and refused to speak. He explained that he didn't know what the police were talking about. With a blank stare and a cold face, not a word came out of his mouth. The gendarme then tried several techniques to make Tony Meillon bend, but again, it didn't work. As the interrogation progressed, he repeatedly smirked, taunting the police, despite their threat of a life sentence.
But the investigators couldn't make any progress. For the moment, their priority is to find Laetitia Perrais quickly. Given that Tony Meillon is of no use in the search for the young woman, the 40 police officers in the field are taking over, along with 25 staff who are taking statements to try and gather as much information as possible.
Helicopters, divers, search dogs, everyone was mobilized to carry out the search. But once again, there was still no trace of Laetitia Perrais. The search expanded, with forensic police combing the house and property of Tony Meillon's cousin. Finally, they made their first discovery. In the trunk of the car, they found dried blood. They feared the worst, and it would be a long time before the results were known. So the gendarme decided to increase the pressure on Tony Meillon, who was still being questioned. He finally broke down and gave his initial versions of what transpired that fateful night. On Tuesday, January 18th, 2011, he reportedly bumped into Laetitia, whom he had known since the summer before. Together, they decided to go for a walk on the beach to smoke a few joints, with plans to meet up later and have a few drinks. Before picking up Laetitia at the hotel, Mayon went to a store to buy her some gloves as a present. At 10 p.m., they went to a nearby bar, Barbe Blues, and a few minutes later to a second bar. According to Mayon, on the way to the second bar, they had consensual sex on the hood of the car. At around 1 a.m., they separated, each heading off in the opposite direction. But on the road home, Mayon noticed that Laetitia had forgotten the gloves he had given her, so he decided to go back and search for her. It was at this point that he unintentionally hit her with his car and felt the car go up.
He was smoking in the car, and the smoke would have prevented him from having good visibility. And because he wasn't paying attention to the road, he believes this is what caused the tragedy. With a stolen car and illegal substances in his possession, he panicked.
Not knowing what to do, he placed the unconscious Laetitia in the trunk of his car and drove her back to his cousin's property. Upon arriving at the property, he noticed that young Laetitia had passed. He then decided to dispose of the body by throwing it off the Saint-Nazaire Bridge into the Loire River. The investigators don't believe his story at all, except perhaps, unfortunately, Laetitia's death. Initial findings on the property and Mayon's story extinguish any last hope of finding Laetitia alive. In the middle of the yard, an area littered with ashes suggests that Mayon regularly built fires for barbecues, since part of a supermarket cart was used as a grill to cook food. But at this location, the investigators made an incredible discovery. They found shears, a knife blade, pliers, and a hacksaw. They also found what looked like pieces of jeans and bra clips, the chin strap of a helmet, and an earring belonging to Laetitia. All of it completely charred. In the car, a 106, the back seat was missing, and there was a significant amount of dried blood. Samples were taken and sent to the laboratory as quickly as possible. In the caravan, thanks to a UV light, the gendarmes can see small traces of blood on a piece of furniture. According to the experts, these are splashes, not drops. There is plenty of evidence to suggest that Tony Mayon was far from telling the truth in his first version of events. While waiting for the lab results to gather as much forensic evidence as possible, investigators take a second suspect into custody. It was Nicolas Bouvet, a former cellmate of Mayon's. They both met up on January 19th, the day Laetitia disappeared. A few weeks before, they had both robbed a solar panel company in order to recover the copper. They had agreed that Mayon would sell the copper and give Bouvet his share when he had sold everything. Mayon then arranged to meet Bouvet in the Atlantis shopping center parking lot. The unsuspecting Bouvet thought he was going to get his hands on the copper money, but that's not what the meeting was about. Mayon was totally panicked, and Bouvet described him as rushed and paranoid, a behavior he didn't understand at all. Mayon's words were incoherent, and Nicolas Bouvet had no idea what was going on. The suspect told his friend that he ran over a man last night and had to cut him up. The remains of the body, according to Mayon at the time, were placed in two large black garbage bags in the trunk of his car. Bouvet explained to the investigators that he thought Meillon was taunting him, that he was joking, or that he was trying to intimidate him to avoid paying his part of the copper he was owed. Faced with Meillon's strange behavior, Bouvet decided to look in the Peugeot's trunk anyway, and indeed noticed the garbage bags. He suddenly felt uneasy about the situation, especially as Meillon's reaction became increasingly suspicious. Meillon went even further, asking his friend for advice on how to hide the pieces of a cut-up body.
Bouvet tells him he should get rid of the remains in the Loire, a river near Nantes. After that, Meillon asks his friend for one last favor. He wants him to dispose of a telephone battery handed to him by the suspect. Bouvet grabs it and throws it away in a corner of the parking lot, as the investigators were able to see on the shopping center's surveillance cameras.
This new testimony confirms that Meillon cut up Laetitia Perrais before disposing of her in the Loire. This would also explain the blood spatters discovered in the caravan. The police officers wasted no time in mobilizing their resources to find Laetitia's remains. They focused on the area around the Saint-Nazaire bridge, since Tony Meillon claimed to have thrown the rest of the body from the top of the bridge. In Meillon's own words, he says,
"I threw her over a bridge. It was the devil who told me to do that, to make all traces disappear."
But the police had been misled. Tony Meillon couldn't have dumped the remains of the body at the top of the bridge. It's a very busy bridge all year round, day and night, and there's nowhere on the bridge to park his vehicle. He couldn't have stopped in the middle of the bridge without being reported to the police by other drivers.
The police then decided to take a look at the surveillance footage, something they should have done long before, and they discovered that Tony Meillon had never even been on the bridge. Two problems start to arise in this investigation. The first is that the investigation is not making much headway, and the press is getting impatient. The media started taking a very close interest in this case. On radio and TV, everyone's talking about it, and the public wants answers. But for the time being, only speculations are emerging in this investigation, since no body has yet been found. The second, and much more serious problem, was that Tony Meillon's detention was almost at an end, and they wouldn't be able to keep him if the investigators didn't find something to incriminate him soon. On top of this, Tony Meillon has been having a lot of fun during interrogations, and he didn't hesitate to send investigators on false leads. He was asked around 100 questions. The interrogations were intense. The gendarmes were insistent, and he quickly understood that they had little evidence against him, but nothing substantial enough to convict him. Tony Meillon would then stall to gain as much time as possible. Don't forget that the suspect has a lot of experience in police custody in the past. He was familiar with interrogation tactics, and he knew very well that without the body, the police wouldn't be able to take any action against him. Despite the absence of a body, the judge nevertheless decided to charge Tony Meillon with kidnapping and false imprisonment, and to remand him in custody. During his transfer, surrounded by a large number of gendarmes, the man began to talk, explaining that they would never find Laetitia, nor would they find the place where he was hiding her. The search went on every day, and it's now the end of January, and still no body has been found. The case then took a new turn as journalists were finally allowed to visit the cousin's property. But if the authorities had given them permission, it was because they had another lead. Police divers were preparing to search 3 ponds near Lavaux-sur-Loire, 50 kilometers from where Tony Meillon lived. One of them is called the Trou Bleu. It's an old quarry. The water there is very opaque and cold, around 4 degrees Celsius, 39 degrees Fahrenheit. It's extremely difficult to see anything in the depths of this pond, but one of the gendarmes came across a wire cage. He then marked the spot with a buoy so he could return better equipped. On the second excursion, he was able to examine the contents of the cage more closely, and he saw fingers sticking out as well as hair. On February 1st, at 11:30 a.m., the first remains of Laetitia were discovered. These were her arms, lower legs, and head, placed in a cage attached to a cinder block at a depth of 7 meters. The bust, however, was not found in the Trou Bleu. It was found much later, on April 9th, 2011, floating in another pond. The bust was attached to a 57-pound cinder block, but decomposition of the body caused it to rise to the surface. It was found by a woman out for a walk. The discovery of Laetitia's body was reported in all the national newspapers on the same day. And it was at this moment when the political aspect came into play. Nicolas Sarkozy, president of the French Republic at the time, pointed the finger at the magistrates and blamed them for Tony Meillon's lack of probation. The magistrates defended themselves, explaining that choices had to be made for the probation of prisoners due to staff shortages.
At the time, Tony Meillon was not considered a priority, which is debatable in view of his criminal record. He had some obligations to follow during his probationary period. He had to find a job, be under the care of a doctor, and prove that he had fulfilled these conditions. If he didn't, he had to return to prison. But none of this was respected, and he should have ended up behind bars.
Nicolas Sarkozy was using Laetitia's case to fight against the penal reform he wanted to implement. Magistrates no longer felt supported by the government in this affair and seemed very angry. They decided to go on strike, bringing the French justice system to a standstill. Out of 195 courts, 170 took part in the strike. But this was no time to make a political statement. This case should have focused on Laetitia's situation and what led to her untimely end. The investigators tried to understand what really happened through an autopsy, and attempted to retrace the events leading up to the crime. The doctor announced that Laetitia Perrais had died of asphyxiation as a result of strangulation. According to the doctor, the young woman had been tortured, as he noted 44 stab wounds before she was dismembered. Gestures of extreme violence. Mayon's DNA was found in the girl's mouth, proving a sexual act. Unfortunately, with this little information, it was impossible to prove consent to the sexual act, so the gendarmes returned to Mayon to present him with the latest evidence, linking him to the murder of young Laetitia. But Mayon decided to return to his original strategy, that of total silence. He didn't confess, so the forensic evidence would have to speak for him when he was tried in court. But would this be enough to convict him of his crimes? And would we ever know what truly happened to Laetitia? Only time would tell. The 22nd of May, 2013, marks the beginning of Tony Mayon's trial. If convicted, he faces life imprisonment. He maintains the same version of events in front of the judge, claiming that he accidentally ran over Laetitia.
He explained that he was scared and didn't know what to do, so he decided to take the body back to his cousin's house. He claims to have stabbed her with his knife without revealing the exact number of times.
The reason? To make the investigators believe that the murder had been orchestrated by a local criminal. He denies, however, that he was behind the dismemberment. He would have tried to do it, but it was too difficult for him. According to him, he enlisted the help of an accomplice whose identity he won't reveal. He calls him Mr. X.
But Mayon's claims don't really stand up to the physical evidence presented by the investigators. The scooter accident could not have killed Laetitia. Tire marks show that the Peugeot 106 braked before impact, therefore reducing the vehicle's speed.
The evidence also contradicts Mayon's version that his car lifted off the ground. The car showed no impact marks, nor any broken headlights or side view mirrors. The investigators concluded that Mayon had instead pushed the scooter to force it to stop. Another piece of evidence that doesn't match Mayon's statement is the cause of death. The autopsy revealed the young girl's cause of death was asphyxia due to strangulation. The suspect sinks further into lies and contradictions. Who really is Tony Mayon? He defines himself as a predator. He grew up in the town of Couëron, near Nantes. His parents separated when he was just 4 years old. His mother started a new life with another man, a situation the young boy could not accept. According to Tony, his new stepfather was extremely violent towards the young boy. His mother loved him, but Tony didn't feel that way. For him, his mother was more interested in her new companion than in her own child. So, young Tony grows up with the idea that his mother hates him, rejects him, and abandons him. He interprets this as a betrayal on his mother's part. the little boy's behavior changes. He went from being a model student to an unruly one, running away from home, getting into mischief, and behaving badly. His mother could no longer handle the situation and decided to place him in a children's home. During his teenage years, he gains a reputation in a housing estate near Nantes, where some people declared,
"He was scary, so it was better not to hang around him too much."
even back then, there were stories of violence with him. He committed his first offenses and went on to serve his first prison term. At just 16 years old, he was convicted of car theft. He was then convicted on 12 other occasions for outrage against law enforcement, robbery, and aggravated assault, including the rape of his cellmate. He spent a total of 11 years behind bars. During his time in prison, he had a brief love affair with a woman who gave birth to his son.
In February 2010, upon his release from prison, he moved into a caravan. But without a job, he gradually sank into alcohol and drugs. A woman close to Tony recounts,
He used to take cannabis and cocaine, and in the end, he used them very regularly. I saw him taking them first thing in the morning.
Despite his unconventional behavior, he still manages to seduce people. His atypical physique and bad boy looks appeal to women, but his relationships never last very long. A close friend states,
he was looking to settle down. He wanted a wife, but the problem was that he was too possessive and jealous. When he had someone, she had to be just for him. He wouldn't accept anyone else.
excessive possessiveness, leading to violence and mistreatment of his female companions. According to the psychiatrist who met him in prison, Tony Mayence suffers from several behavioral disorders. He is both paranoid, he thinks that others are angry with him, and also has a megalomaniac dimension, a desire for power and control which makes him extremely violent. He is described as a psychopath, manipulative, and with very few emotions. He doesn't suffer from a mental illness, but from a personality disorder. And that's what led to his actions on the evening of January 18th, 2011. He was afraid, as he was already a registered sex offender following the rape of his cellmate. As soon as Laetitia threatened to reveal the sexual assault to everyone, he decided to kill her. At a solidarity march in memory of Laetitia, many expressed their indignation and anger.
I'm so angry because I have 3 daughters and it doesn't just happen to others. And this man should have stayed in prison and never got out.
For me, he's not a murderer. He's a monster. He deserves nothing more than to have the death penalty reinstated.
Tony Mayence's trial opens in a few days, and Frank Perrais, the girl's father, is impatiently waiting for this moment. He thinks about his daughter every day. He's been suffering for 2 years, and it's exhausting for him to wait so long for the murderer's trial. Frank Perrais is preparing to face it. I'm not afraid to look him in the eye, he says. He simply wants Tony to take responsibility for his actions and tell the whole truth. Because up till now, he's never really told anyone in detail about the crime he committed. He just wants to play, and according to Frank, he wants to control the world. While waiting for his trial, Tony Mayon writes letters addressed directly to the judge, as we can see from this excerpt.
January 18th could have been a day like any other, a day of solitude and melancholy, sinking into substances. At that moment, I saw Laetitia.
He goes on to recount part of the accident.
I hit something, and the shock went right through the steering wheel. I stopped the car dead in my tracks. I saw Laetitia lying on the ground, her scooter in the ditch. I leaned over, opened the visor of her helmet, and saw the blood inside. She didn't move. The devil took hold of me. I put her in the trunk. I can't remember what I did. It's a total blank.
On the day of his trial, there's a huge crowd, including many curious onlookers who want to see the famous Tony Mayon, whose mysterious personality fascinates them. After considering all the witness testimonies and evidence against him, members of the jury find Tony Mayon guilty of the murder of Laetitia Perrais. The judge pronounces the verdict: life imprisonment for Tony Mayon. This verdict is accompanied by a minimum 22-year sentence to serve, as well as a public safety detention period. The convicted man will remain imprisoned in a specialized facility for as long as he is still considered dangerous by doctors and psychiatric experts. Certainly not satisfied with the jury's decision, he decides to appeal, promising to name the accomplice who had dismembered young Laetitia. He is heard a second time, but once again, it's a false lead. The name he gave was someone who had already been questioned by the police and had a solid alibi. However, the new sentence will be more lenient. He will be exempt from health detention at the end of his sentence and will be able to apply for parole at the end of his stay in prison. But he will still be sentenced to life imprisonment with a condition of 22 years without parole. This is one of France's biggest criminal sentences to date. He will not be released until 2034, at which time a review will be carried out to determine whether he should be released or left behind bars. At the start of his sentence, he had a difficult time acting out and even added an extra year in prison for setting fire to his cell. However, today, he seems to have settled down and is currently serving his sentence in Assisheim prison in the east of France.
However, our case doesn't end here. We can see the chaos Tony Mayon introduced into young Laetitia's life. But what could have led such a bright and motivated girl to spend time with a guy like Tony? There's still more to this story, and for that, we have to go back to the beginning of the girl's transition into foster care.
In 2005, the girls decided to opt for a foster care family and were sent for a trial period to Gilles and Michel Patron, who live in a house in Pornic, France. The trial period went very well, and everyone was very happy. On April 15th, 2005, it became official, and the judge established Rue de la Rogère in Pornic as the girls' new home. Gilles Patron, born in 1950 in La Montagne, a boilermaker by profession, is a former accounting secretary of the shipbuilding division in Indre. Laid off due to downsizing measures, he became a family assistant in 1995 for the Loire-Atlantique General Council. From that moment on, the Patron family took in foster children. In total, the family has taken in 6 youth in a long-term placement and 48 in temporary placement. Gilles Patron is also a foster family delegate for the Pays de Retz region. An athlete himself, he also coaches judo, soccer, and gymnastics. Michelle Patron, his wife, is a retired Catholic school teacher. The twins continue, as before, to attend the same school as they were in foster care. In 2011, Laetitia Perrais worked in a work-study program at the Hôtel de Nantes in La Bernerie en Retz, preparing for a waitressing diploma at a training center in Saint-Nazaire. Her salary was equivalent to the minimum wage. Her sister, Jessica, was studying for a diploma in cooking. On the outside, Laetitia was a trouble-free girl with a boyfriend named Kevin and led a rather quiet life. But according to several witnesses, in recent months, she had been marked by a sadness that no one really understood. Her behavior was changing, according to those close to her. In the weeks leading up to her abduction, she wrote several suicide and farewell letters to her loved ones. Just 2 months after Laetitia's murder, another person was taken into custody and forced to defend himself to the police. To everyone's dismay, it was Gilles Patron, the adoptive father of the 2 twin girls, Laetitia and Jessica Perrais. He has been accused of sexually assaulting several of the girls he housed, including his own adopted daughter, Jessica. At first, he firmly denied the accusations, but eventually broke down and explained that he had only had relations with Jessica after she had come of legal age, that it was all consensual, and that they were in a relationship. In 2006, Gilles Patron began sexually abusing Jessica, taking advantage of the emotional ties that had been formed with her. Gilles Patron, the adoptive father of Laetitia and Jessica, was sentenced to 8 years in prison in 2014 for the rape and sexual assault of 5 victims, including Jessica. Jessica believes that her sister is also a victim of the man they regarded as their adoptive father, a belief later confirmed by Laetitia's best friend, Leah. In 2010, Leah filed a complaint for assault, and one of Jessica's friends lodged a complaint of inappropriate touching. Laetitia is said to have confided to a friend that she was also a victim of Gilles Patron, but this will never be officially proven. He was released from prison at the end of 2017, thanks to a reduced sentence. Today, he is a free man. As of recording, we now know that Jessica is 31 and has left the region for good. She had just too much trauma in that area, and it was impossible for her to continue living there. She wishes to remain anonymous, to try and continue living a quiet life. She's in a relationship and no longer works in the restaurant business.
Thank you for watching our video.
We are excited to share these stories with you and to give a voice to the victims worldwide.
If you enjoyed this story,
you can help us out by liking the video, subscribing to our channel, and punching the notification bell.
very important, don't forget to give us your opinions in the comments.
Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Au
Au
revoir!
revoir!